So both during and then especially the years after the war, Americans had to discover the reasons for the war. What was its meaning? Why did all those boys die? Right? The level of death had to have some meaning and had to have some greater purpose, right? To not have deep meaning would be unfathomable, right? If it was just a loss of life with no meaning at that unprecedented level, there had to be a sense that there was some greater purpose to it. Now, two of the major things that came up for was freedom, right, of both blacks and whites, and religious national identity. Religious national destiny, this sort of sense that Americans paid the price for the crime of slavery. And the most popular song that sort of emphasizes this is the Battle Cry of Freedom, which was a very popular song during the war. It was a popular song for African Americans, especially going to battle, but still a popular song about national pride and the purpose of the Civil War. So I'm going to play the song, and you can follow along with the singing and looking at lyrics. Just think about what's the purpose of the song based on the lyrics of the song. song does is that it compares those that lost their lives in the Civil War to a religious martyrdom, right? He died to make men holy. Let us die to make men free. That idea that Jesus Christ died to save men, and that this is the death, the similar sacrifice for freedom. Now, Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address in November of 1863, so this is several months after the Battle of Gettysburg, which I talked about before, and I said that it was still a really sort of noxious place to be. But this Gettysburg, this is the whole speech, and it's quite short, which is why students used to have to memorize this in grade school. Right? 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living in debt, who struggled here, have consecrated it, far above our power to add or detract. The world will little not, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So what is that legacy? Lincoln is saying this is a land of freedom. This is a united government of democracy. And this is a very difficult time, right? This is the time of the speech only about a third of the dead have been buried. Family are digging graves for their loved ones. And he's switching up from an earlier conception of union to one of nation, right? Instead of just states coming together and uniting, he's saying, no, we're not United States. We're actually a single nation of people rather than states, of a single purpose rather than united purposes. Now, this has a very strong religious sort of destiny component to it, this idea of making sure that there's meaning to this war, and that it's up to the living, not just to memorialize that meaning, but to continue that legacy. And a lot of ministers strive to tell their parishioners that people didn't die in vain, right? They see the war as a spiritual battle. The war is God's punishment to man for slavery. So they've had to pay the price, but they didn't die in vain because this legacy came out on the other end. Freedom came out on the other end. Now, this is an image of Lincoln's second inaugural address. That's in March of 1865. And it's a little bit strange, but at the very top of the picture, you can see John Wilkes Booth. It's a face from the second pillar from the right. This is sort of not the man in the hat, the one next to him. That's John Wilkes Booth, which is a little freaky. Now, in the second inaugural address itself, Lincoln said, "Woe unto the world because of offences, for it must needs be that offences come, but woe to that man by whom this offensive cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offences which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offence came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in the living God always ascribe to him?" What he's saying in 1865 is, in his second inaugural address, is that this war was God's punishment. This war was God's punishment. He loves us still because he gives us this war, because this is a sin that we have to fight from us, but we will come out the other side. Strangely enough, Lincoln is one of the few presidents who never joined a church, but he did proclaim many days of Thanksgiving after victories. Lincoln is assassinated April 14th, 1865, 5 days after Appomattox, by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln was watching Our American Cousin. It's a comedy in the theater, and he's the first of 4 presidents to be killed in office. It's Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. And it's a huge loss right after a huge victory, right? So he becomes a martyr cause rather than just the soldiers. And here is the procession for his funeral.